The bell above the cafe's door gave a cheerful little chime as it swung open, but the mood inside shifted the moment the man walked in. His presence was like a gust of cold wind. Expensive cologne clung to his tailored suit, the kind only the wealthiest could afford, and the gleam of his diamond cufflinks caught the cafe's warm light. He didn't so much walk as he owned the room with his stride, the arrogance radiating off him like a second skin. Conversations dimmed, replaced by cautious glances. The man didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He was used to being watched. The cashier behind the counter, a young woman named Emily, instinctively straightened her apron and forced a polite smile. She was new to this job, her first week, in fact, and she was still learning how to balance the chaos of the morning rush. She greeted him with a nervous but kind tone. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" The man barely looked at her. His eyes darted over the menu as if the words on it offended him. "Coffee. Black. Large. And make it quick." His voice was sharp, clipped, like a whip cracking in the air. Emily nodded and tapped the order into the register. "That'll be $4.75, please." For a moment, the billionaire froze, his lip curling in disgust, as though the very idea of paying was beneath him. With a dramatic sigh, he pulled out a thick roll of cash and tossed a 50 onto the counter. The bill landed with a sharp slap. "Try not to mess up the change," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened the register. She had always struggled with math under pressure, and now, with the man's eyes boring into her, her anxiety worsened. She carefully counted the bills and coins, but her hesitation gave him an opening. A cruel smile spread across his face. "What's the matter? Too dumb to count change? Don't they teach you basic arithmetic before they let you work here?" His words carried across the café, loud enough for everyone to hear. A hush fell over the room. Customers glanced at each other, discomfort etched on their faces. Some shifted in their seats, others looked down at their coffee cups, unwilling to get involved. Emily's cheeks burned crimson. Her eyes flicked to the line of waiting customers, all staring, and then back down to the coins in her palm. Her voice caught in her throat. The billionaire leaned in, his smirk widening. "I bet this job is the best you could get, huh? Counting pennies while the rest of us actually make money. Pathetic." Emily swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She wanted to defend herself, to shout that she was working this job while studying nights at the community college, that she was doing everything she could to support her sick mother at home. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was tight, her hands still shaking. The café, usually a place filled with warmth and chatter, now felt like a courtroom where she was being publicly judged and mocked. And then, unnoticed by most at first, the door opened again. Another customer walked in. He wore a simple black hoodie, jeans that had seen better days, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't draw attention. In fact, he blended in perfectly. He joined the line quietly, slipping in behind a group of regulars. But there was something about the way he stood. Calm, patient, observant. His eyes, hidden by the cap's shadow, studied the billionaire, studied Emily, studied the room. He didn't need to say anything yet. His mere presence carried weight. As Emily finally pushed the man's change across the counter, her fingers brushing his palm, the billionaire chuckled cruelly. "See? I knew it would take you forever. Some people just aren't cut out for anything better than this. Too dumb for real work." The words echoed in the small café, sharp as a blade. Emily blinked rapidly, forcing herself not to cry. The billionaire's smirk widened, satisfied with the attention he had commanded. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that the quiet man in the hoodie at the back of the line was Keanu Reeves. And he had seen enough. The line shuffled forward, and with every step, Keanu Reeves grew closer to the counter. To most in the café, he was still invisible, just another customer, another face in the morning crowd. The baseball cap shielded him from recognition, and his hoodie disguised the stature that so many filmgoers would instantly know. But Keanu had always mastered the art of blending in. He moved like water, quiet, unobtrusive, slipping into spaces where others might dominate. Yet even without revealing who he was, something about his presence seemed to steady the air around him. Where the billionaire's arrogance had filled the room like a storm, Keanu's calm was a silent anchor. Emily, meanwhile, was trying desperately to keep herself together. Her hands busied themselves with cups, lids, and receipts, but her mind was a hurricane. She could still feel the sting of humiliation pressing on her chest, her ears ringing with the billionaire's words, too dumb, pathetic, not cut out for real work. They replayed like a cruel recording, louder with every heartbeat. She dared not meet the eyes of the customers in line, afraid she'd see pity or worse, agreement. Her only escape was to keep moving, to cling to the rhythm of her work. The billionaire leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee with exaggerated satisfaction, as if every gesture was meant to remind the room of his superiority. He chuckled to himself, scrolling through his phone, muttering the occasional insult under his breath. Slow service. Amateur hour. No wonder this place looks like a dump. Each comment was sharp enough to be heard, and each one deepened the silence that hung heavy in the café. It was in this silence that Keanu finally reached the counter. He offered Emily a warm smile, gentle, unhurried, sincere. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice a balm against the tension. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the kindness, and instinctively straightened. "Hi, what can I get for you?" she stammered. "A medium latte, please." "Take your time," Keanu replied, sliding a folded bill across the counter with steady hands. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Take your time. It was the opposite of everything the billionaire had demanded. Emily hesitated, her throat tightening, as if she might cry then and there, not from insult this time, but from relief. Someone had noticed. Someone cared enough to give her space, however small. The billionaire snorted, looking up from his phone. "Oh, wonderful. Another one who doesn't mind waiting for incompetence." He smirked, sipping his coffee again. "You'll be here all day if you let her take her time. Trust me." His tone dripped with mockery, directed not only at Emily but now at Keanu as well. He expected laughter, expected the crowd to nod along. Instead, the café seemed to hold its breath. Keanu's smile never faltered, though his jaw flexed subtly, the only sign of irritation. He didn't meet the billionaire's eyes, didn't even glance his way. Instead, he leaned gently against the counter, maintaining his focus on Emily. "It smells great in here," he continued conversationally, as though he and Emily were the only two people in the café. "Must be a lot of work in the mornings, huh?" Emily's lips trembled into the faintest of smiles. She nodded quickly, grateful for his kindness. "Why yes, it can get really busy. But I'm still learning." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she bit her lip, embarrassed to have admitted it out loud. Keanu's eyes softened, his voice lowering in empathy. "That's how everyone starts. Learning. Nothing wrong with that." The words struck her harder than he knew. To her, they weren't just words from a customer, they were a lifeline. Someone had seen her not as a failure, not as a target, but as a human being in progress. It was such a small kindness, yet in that moment, it felt monumental. The billionaire scoffed again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Learning? Huh. If she's this slow on her first week, she'll be worthless in her first year. Some people are just born useless, no matter how much learning they do." His voice rose, punctuated by derisive laughter. The café's atmosphere shifted sharply. A few customers turned their heads, some shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. Others whispered, their eyes darting between the billionaire and Keanu, sensing something was about to unfold. The tension had become a wire-pulled taut, ready to snap. Keanu finally turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His eyes, once calm and kind, now held a sharp intensity that cut through the billionaire's smug grin. For the first time, the billionaire faltered, taken aback by the quiet fire in that gaze. It wasn't anger in the traditional sense, it was something deeper, steadier. A silent message. Enough. But Keanu didn't speak yet. Not to him. He simply turned back to Emily and said gently, "You're doing just fine. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, his smirk tightening. The quiet man in the hoodie wasn't reacting the way he expected. No outrage, no shouting match, just an unshakable calm that somehow undermined his entire performance. For the first time since walking into the café, the billionaire realized he wasn't fully in control of the room anymore. And the customers, their eyes were no longer on him. They were on the man in the hoodie, The stranger who spoke with a kind of grounded assurance that couldn't be bought. Emily handed Keanu his latte, her hand still trembling, though this time not from humiliation, but from the strange, unexpected comfort that radiated from him. She managed to whisper, "Thank you," her voice almost breaking. Keanu nodded with a faint smile, accepting the cup. "Don't thank me. Just keep going." The billionaire's laughter rang out again, forced this time, brittle at the edges. "What are you, her life coach? You think words mean anything in the real world? You think she'll get anywhere with pity and lattes?" He shook his head with exaggerated disdain. "Pathetic. Both of you." The café froze again. The insults had spread their poison too far, and something had to give. The air itself seemed to thrum with anticipation, as if the walls were waiting to hear what the quiet stranger in the hoodie would say next. Keanu took a slow sip of his latte, set it gently back down, and finally turned fully toward the billionaire. His eyes no longer carried just kindness, but a strength born of decades of life, hardship, and resilience. The kind of strength that needed no theatrics, no display. The kind of strength that came only from character. For the first time since his arrogant arrival, the billionaire looked uneasy. He had no idea who the man in front of him was. But he was about to find out. The billionaire shifted in his chair, swirling his coffee as if he owned the very air in the café, his sneer never fading. Yet the energy in the room had begun to slip from his grasp. Whispers stirred among the customers, a current of anticipation building with each passing second. All eyes darted back and forth between the arrogant man in his pristine suit and the calm, hooded stranger whose quiet dignity unsettled him. Emily stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes red but hopeful now, clinging to the brief kindness Keanu had shown her. It was as if the balance of the entire café hung on the next few breaths. Keanu, still unhurried, placed his latte carefully back on the counter. The faint steam curled upward, framing his face in soft wisps. He turned fully toward Emily again, deliberately ignoring the billionaire at his side, and spoke just loudly enough for the surrounding customers to hear. "You know, it takes strength to work a job like this. Early mornings, endless faces, long hours on your feet. It isn't easy, but you're doing it. And that's something to be proud of." His words were measured, each syllable landing like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripple spread through the room, settling into the hearts of those listening. A few customers nodded subtly, their expressions softening. For the first time, Emily felt as if the weight pressing on her chest had eased. The billionaire let out a loud, mocking laugh, his voice cutting harshly through the café. "Strength? Are you kidding me? This is nothing but low-level grunt work. Anyone can stand behind a counter and push buttons. Don't romanticize incompetence." He raised his voice as though commanding an audience, flashing his teeth in a smug grin. "Look at her, barely able to count change. You call that strength? Please. Some people are born winners, others, losers." His hand swept through the air dismissively, as if brushing Emily out of existence. But this time, the café didn't respond with silence. Instead, a murmur of disapproval rippled through the line. A woman near the back shook her head. A man by the window whispered something sharp to his friend. The mood had shifted. The billionaire, once the center of attention, was now being measured, and found lacking, by the very people he sought to impress. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm, almost conversational, but carrying an edge now. "Funny thing about winners," he said, turning his gaze to the billionaire without blinking. "Real winners don't need to tear other people down to feel tall. They don't measure themselves against cashiers or waiters or anyone working hard to make an honest living. They measure themselves by the way they treat others, especially those who can't offer them anything in return." His words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than anger ever could. The billionaire froze, his smirk faltering for just a heartbeat before he forced it back onto his face. But the damage was done. He had expected confrontation, maybe even shouting, something he could sneer at and dismiss as emotional. What he hadn't expected was this, a quiet, unshakable strength that dismantled him without ever raising its voice. And for the first time, he felt the audience slipping away, turning their backs on him, drawn instead to the stranger in the hoodie whose presence filled the room with something he couldn't buy, respect. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, tears threatening to spill again, but this time they weren't born of shame. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of witnessing someone step into the fire on her behalf when she thought she was utterly alone. In that moment, the café transformed, not into a courtroom where she was judged, but into a sanctuary where her dignity was restored. And though she didn't know who the man was, she knew this. He had just shifted the ground beneath her feet. The billionaire's forced smirk lingered, but the cracks were showing. His laughter rang hollow, bouncing off the café's walls without finding an echo. For the first time, he wasn't the one commanding the room. The customers weren't feeding his ego with nervous silence. Instead, their eyes gravitated to Keanu, the stranger whose calm words carried more weight than all the billionaire's wealth combined. The café hummed with tension, the kind that precedes a storm, and everyone knew something was about to break. Keanu, still holding his latte, stepped back from the counter and looked around the café. His gaze swept across the room, not hurried, not performative, but steady, acknowledging each person as though they mattered. Then, in one smooth motion, he pulled out his wallet, slid a sleek black card from it, and placed it gently on the counter. "I'll cover everyone in line," he said, his voice soft but firm, carrying through the café like a calm drumbeat. For a moment, silence followed. Then gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Emily's mouth fell open. "Sir, there's no need to," she stammered. "There is," Keanu interrupted gently, not unkindly. He didn't look at her with pity, but with steady reassurance. "This isn't about coffee. It's about showing respect where it's due." His eyes flicked briefly, deliberately, to the billionaire. "And reminding some people that kindness has more value than money ever will." The billionaire scoffed, his face tightening. He pushed away from the counter, voice rising again in mockery. "Oh, please. What is this, some kind of stunt? You think you're a hero for buying a few coffees? That's pocket change to me. You can't teach me anything about value. I live it every day." He smirked again, gesturing to his tailored suit, his watch that gleamed under the café lights. "This is what value looks like. Not whatever this little performance is." But the billionaire's words didn't land the way he intended. Instead of applause, instead of nods of agreement, there was silence, icy, condemning silence. The customers weren't impressed by the suit or the watch anymore. Their attention stayed on Keanu, who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted anyone, but whose quiet dignity was dismantling the billionaire's performance piece by piece. Keanu finally turned to face him fully. His voice was calm, almost too calm, but it carried a finality that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Value," he said, "isn't what you wear or how much money you can throw at people. It's how you treat others, especially when no one is watching. That's the measure of a man." He paused, his eyes steady, unwavering. "And right now, everyone is watching." The words landed like a hammer. The billionaire's smug grin faltered completely, replaced by a flash of anger, then uncertainty. He glanced around, realizing every pair of eyes in the café was fixed on him, not with admiration, but with disapproval, even disgust. He had wanted to humiliate Emily, but instead, he had humiliated himself. His power, built on arrogance and intimidation, was gone. Emily's hands covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling as the tears finally spilled, not tears of shame this time, but of release. The applause started softly, from a woman in the back of the café, then grew as others joined in. Soon the room filled with the sound of clapping, the kind that wasn't just for Keanu, but for the truth he had spoken aloud, the truth everyone had wanted to hear but no one had dared to say. And in that moment, the tables truly turned. The billionaire, once the center of attention, now stood exposed, diminished by his own cruelty. And Keanu, the quiet stranger in the hoodie, had restored dignity to a cashier with nothing more than kindness, courage, and conviction. The applause swelled until it filled every corner of the café. For a moment, the billionaire stood frozen, his hands tightening into fists at his sides, his jaw clenched so tight the vein in his neck pulsed visibly. This was not the stage he was used to. This was not the audience he expected. He had always thrived on control, on bending a room to his will with sheer arrogance, but here, surrounded by strangers, he was suddenly powerless. The weight of their eyes pressed down harder than any boardroom negotiation ever had. The humiliation settled like ash in his throat, bitter and suffocating. Keanu didn't gloat, didn't raise his hands in triumph like a man who had won a battle. He simply stood quietly, sipping his coffee, as if the moment had nothing to do with him. That humility was sharper than any insult could have been. It wasn't about victory for Keanu, it was about restoring balance, about reminding everyone that dignity mattered more than power. That realization made the billionaire's anger boil hotter, but at the same time, somewhere deep beneath it, something twisted uncomfortably inside him. Shame. A feeling he hadn't let himself acknowledge in years. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling, but strong enough to carry. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at Keanu. The tears that glistened on her cheeks were no longer born of humiliation but gratitude. For the first time since the billionaire's words had cut into her, she stood tall. The café, now united in its quiet rebellion against cruelty, stood with her. In that collective silence, the billionaire felt smaller than he ever had. Someone in the crowd broke the tension with a simple statement that carried like a stone thrown into still water: "Money doesn't make you better than people." The words weren't shouted, but they resonated. Others murmured in agreement, and the billionaire shifted uncomfortably. For once, there was no escape, no adoring crowd, no paid entourage to clap him back into confidence. Just a room full of ordinary people holding up a mirror to his arrogance, and the reflection staring back was ugly. Keanu placed a gentle hand on the counter, addressing Emily once more. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than who you are," he said, his voice low but steady. "You work hard, you treat people with kindness, and that's worth more than every dollar in this man's bank account." The billionaire flinched, not because of the volume, but because the words cut to the bone. Keanu turned to him one last time, his tone even, his expression unreadable. "One day, you'll understand that lesson. Maybe today. Maybe years from now. But it will come." The billionaire's lips parted as if to fire back a retort, but no words came. His throat tightened, his face pale. He had spent his life mastering arguments, outshouting opponents, and crushing dissent with confidence. But here, under the gaze of strangers and the unflinching calm of Keanu Reeves, his words abandoned him. He grabbed his designer jacket from the back of his chair, muttered something incoherent, and stormed toward the door. The bell above it chimed as he shoved it open, his retreat as loud and graceless as his entrance had been. The café erupted, not with jeers, not with insults, but with relief. Conversations resumed, but lighter now, voices carrying a renewed warmth. Emily's co-workers surrounded her with quiet encouragement, some patting her shoulder, others giving her soft smiles. She wiped her eyes, laughing shakily through the remnants of tears, as if a burden had been lifted off her chest. For the first time all day, she felt seen. Keanu didn't linger in the spotlight. He gave Emily a simple nod, his expression carrying more weight than words ever could, then slipped his wallet back into his pocket. He turned toward the door, not waiting for thanks, not waiting for recognition. As he walked past the tables, people whispered, some even reached out to shake his hand, but he moved with the same humility he had entered with. To him, this wasn't a performance. It was just the right thing to do. Outside, the evening air was cool, the city buzzing softly in the distance. Keanu stepped into the street, blending back into the rhythm of ordinary life, his hoodie pulled up, his stride unhurried. Within minutes, he was gone, like a ripple fading into still water. But inside the café, the lesson remained, etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Emily would remember this day not as the time she was belittled by a man with too much money, but as the day a stranger, quiet, humble, and kind, reminded her of her worth. And the billionaire, no matter how deeply he tried to bury the moment, would never quite escape the mirror that had been held up to him. For sometimes the greatest lessons don't come with shouting or punishment, but with the unshakable dignity of someone who refuses to look away. And so, the final scene closed not with grandeur, but with something more powerful: silence, reflection, and the kind of unexpected lesson that changes people forever.